All right, welcome back to another episode of Verticals. I'm Luke Sophinos. I'm in the founder seat.
And I'm Nick in the VC seat.
Today we got a killer episode for you. We have Scott Wolfe, who is the founder and CEO of Levelset, which he sold to Procore for $500 million after getting it to a few tens of millions in ARR. We're going to hear exactly from him on the entire M&A process, what it's like from the founder seat, how to approach it, what worked, what didn't work, tips and tricks he has, so that you can understand exactly how to sell your vertical software business. He's also going to go deep for us on the construction market broadly, where he sees opportunities today, areas he thinks founders should stay away from. We're going to talk about recent funding announcements in the space. So today's episode is all in on construction tech. Let's dive in.
All right. We are very excited to welcome Scott Wolfe on the show today. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. I think this is going to be a great one. For those of you who aren't already familiar, Scott is the founder and former CEO of Levelset, which is a absolute titan in the construction vertical software space. And he's going to walk us through that story. Scott, you want to kick us off with just a little background for all the listeners out there?
Oh, sure. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I like the show. My background, I have a little bit of an eclectic background. If you go way back, I grew up in the grocery business with a very entrepreneurial family, was in retail for a while, was always tinkering with software and like building what was back then, right? Websites in the 90s, like building websites and then building some websites that had some functionality. And that really, during college and law school, I just kept tinkering with those things. After law school, I graduated. Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, which is where I live, which turned it into like a very productive construction ecosystem. And that's what thrust me into the construction industry from a variety of angles. I was doing some construction law, and from that spun this concept with Levelset. And so my background is just kind of touching and playing with a lot of different things, which really came together, like my entrepreneurial background, my software background, my legal background, and then a construction background kind of all collided into Levelset.
And Scott, so you were a lawyer for a long time. I mean, what was kind of that original spark that, kind of made you want to go out and start a software company? Was it the idea, or?
I was a lawyer for a short time.
Fair.
Once you get a law degree, they don't let you escape. I still have to pay dues. I'm like unactive. I have to send them a letter every year saying I don't practice. So they don't let you go. But I practiced law, but I was a little bit more of a business person that was in law for a few years, because I had built my own law firm. I started my own law firm, which had a very digital interface for it as well, which was very uncommon in 2005, 2006, which is when I was doing that. So I was always, law was like one of the little pots that I had on the stove, I think is a better way of thinking about it. And the other pots were more software oriented, more digital, more business oriented, more horizontal in that way. So the law, I still even have some relatives like think I'm a lawyer still. I don't know what to do about it.
We won't ask you for legal advice in this call, I promise.
That's somebody asked me for legal advice like yesterday. I was like, I don't do that. I've done this in a long time.
So Scott, what was that, so you're in this really interesting environment, Hurricane Katrina, you're in New Orleans. What was that kind of spark of, that first spark for Levelset?
My first case, it's a funny story. I'm 25 years old. I got my law degree, months ago. And I'm out there hustling for hang my own shingle. I'm hustling for business. Somebody reaches out to me about not being paid on a construction project, and they're filing a lien, and they're arguing for the lien that it's valid in court. And I go to court My first case, I don't even know. I don't realize that it's a full court proceeding. That way you have to put on witnesses and evidence and all this stuff. I thought it was kind of like a motion. And so I'm there completely unprepared defending this lien. And I think when I think about like the spark, part of it was that I, for some reason or another, was in an environment where there was a lot of payment disputes and there was a lot of people waiting for payment. There's such a high volume of construction. And it was an environment where people were waiting on insurance money. So I was rapidly, like a lot of this, the inflow of clients that I had was related to some sort of payment dispute, which led to liens, which led me to being like trying to figure out, how do you file a lien? I thought I was going to be able to go to something like LegalZoom and file a lien for these people. But then I had to go read the law and figure out how to do it. Long story short there is the spark was that I thought that it was odd how difficult it was to do this little thing. And I had this experience of building tools in order to make complicated things like that.
That's super helpful background. So, you got that original spark, and then, I guess maybe just take us through the first couple of years. I mean, when did you guys first start getting that traction? When did you think about your first venture round?
Yeah. So, and by the way, that spark is kind of, I think in vertical spaces is really important. Like I don't know if there's any way I could have come up with Levelset, but for having the insights being kind of plugged into working on the problem for somebody. It took me years to figure out how to even explain the problem to people, right? That trying to understand it, like investors or employees or whatever who were trying to understand it, still explaining it. It took me years to really get good at that. So I don't know how you can come from outer space and see this problem, which turned out to be a very valuable problem in construction. So the first few years was slow. I did it on the side of my desk for 2, 3, 4 years. And it just kind of was this very simple wizard that helped people with a kind of a singular document that I started expanding into different states because the different U.S. states were complicated or it had a different complication. And it grew to maybe like $200,000 of revenue just on the side of my desk when I wasn't working on it full time. And I thought, all right, I think this is something that I got to spend a little bit more time on. And that's when I cut bait with I had a software development business that I was running. I had my law firm that I was running. I was helping my parents with their business. And I kind of cut my ties with all those things. And this is around 2012. And I decided to focus full time on Levelset. I worked on a small friends and family or angel round, which was there was a New Orleans little startup fund. That was what they actually called, the New Orleans Startup Fund. In this, we were able to put together a little $500,000 angel round, which these days sounds extraordinarily quaint, right? And we lived on the $500,000. We hired our first person, and then we spent 3 years on that $500,000, growing the business from about $200,000 of revenue to about $2 million of revenue, and basically bouncing in and out of cash flow positivity throughout. And that's when we started to get our hands around the model. We had made it. We had kind of gotten really close to experimenting with a pure SaaS model, which before we were a bit more transactional, a bit more like LegalZoom. We had really built out the tech. We had a team maybe of 15. And that's when we raised our first true venture round, the brick and mortar ventures out of San Francisco. We raised like $1.3 million, and then started to grow. We had a lot of benefit from spending 3 years or 4 years getting really seeped in the problem. The team really understood the problem. We had a really nice tool to sell. We understood the customer really well, and we took that 1.2 million in 2015. We did a Series A in 2016. We did a Series B in 2017. Is that right? Yeah. Then we did like a Series C in 2019. And so it was after that, we were really starting to scale.
Yep. And was it, around then, Procore had already reached some scale. I think that was kind of around the era of, maybe PlanGrid's exit. Did it feel like you guys were really, kind of hitting a unique time in construction tech, or how did you view those players?
So first off, Procore was not really, they were early when we started, right? I started in 20,000. I started it in like the company in True when I was on the side of my desk, like 2009, 2008. Procore was a small company back then, right? When we raised our first series, when we raised our Series Seed venture round in 2015, Procore was really just starting to kind of poke out. Right? And so they were just, I had noticed them. And then PlanGrid and Building Connected and FieldWire, these companies were all like cousins in the brick and mortar portfolio with me. We were all funded at the same time. I knew a lot of those people well. We would see each other at the brick and mortar summit every year. So we were kind of watching them. PlanGrid was a little bit, maybe a cycle or two ahead of us. Building Connected was really close. So it was a really interesting time where all those things were coming together. And from my perspective, I saw kind of two things that I thought were really unique about Levelset's position and Levelset's opportunity. One was just construction payment and construction finance seemed to be a behemoth of a category that was going to get carved out. And another company we were watching that popped up was Textura, right? And they sold out to Oracle, obviously. So that seemed, I don't know why, but I just got a really clear picture in my head about the inevitability of the construction, finance, and payment space. And the other thing that made Levelset really different and still makes it different and kind of makes it not belong with a lot of these other players is we looked at the market and built our business from a bottoms up perspective, which means that we looked at the material suppliers and the subcontractors, and they were our predominant beachhead and our predominant customer. And we thought that they produced interesting network effects. Most of the other players, all the other players really like gravitate towards the general contractor, and they think that produces interesting network effects. And so we were different in that regard. And I thought that was going to be a really impactful part of our position and our opportunity. And I think it was with respect to how much we succeeded with it. But we got ultimately we sold to a company that had a completely different position around the general contractor. And I think that particular position kind of got lost in the cracks of the merger.
So two core differentiation angles that you took were basically selling more SMB or very SMB with the GCs as opposed to the other players we were talking about. They maybe were more mid-market enterprise. And then you guys were really honing in on like liens on payments. And those guys seem to be more honing in around like kind of system of record, ERP-esque stuff or stuff that would build into that. Like I didn't FieldWire start with more of like the time clock aspect okay. So that was the two kind of core unique pieces that kind of set you guys apart.
Yeah. And the one nuance that always gets lost is that when people hear subcontractors, they think SMB, or they hear bottom of the chain, they think SMB. But big part about we had a pretty bifurcated like go-to market, especially at scale. Part of it was SMB, where we had an average deal size at exit of $4,500 to $5,000, right? And we had users in that category in the thousands of users at that dollar amount. On the other side, though, we had a mid-market and enterprise sale to the suppliers. And material suppliers are enormous companies, right? Enormous enterprise companies. At scale, like at exit, we would have contracts that was seven figures. So we just didn't have we just didn't ever go for the general contractors.
Got it. I think it's a good lesson too for founders listening, because as you see your industry and people. We had Kyle from owner.com on recently who, everybody said Toast had won the restaurant vertical, and an owner appears and they're growing like, a rocket ship because they focus on a completely different problem set, a different kind of end customer within that. They sub-verticalized it out. And so it's a good lesson for founders as they're looking at their industry. And it led to the acquisition, which I know we're going to talk a lot about M&A broadly here shortly, where if you do something different, even if it's, from the product standpoint, awesome, great, differentiate yourself there. But you can also differentiate on like the subsegment of the customer type of the ACB. Like and that becomes valuable to an acquirer if it's different and diversified from what they're doing.
Different, Luke, never goes out of style. And with respect to construction tech or real estate tech, whatever category you want to put it in specifically, when I want to claw my eyeballs out when I see another deck that is got a tool for some general contractor pain point on the job site to keep track of something. I'm like, I just get so frustrated with them. I don't know why it's so obvious to me, or I feel like it's obvious that a lot of those are a dead end. Even Procore and Autodesk are kind of at a dead end with the general contractors. They have to go international, or they have to go to, civil, or they have to go to owners, or they're out searching for different pockets to put to grow. But they have millions of companies surrounding their business. I don't know why. I just don't understand why there's such a fixation and a hyper fixation in construction tech around the general contractor sale. I think that the opportunities are so rich elsewhere.
So I think that's a good segue. Like maybe before we get to the M&A stuff, like as you look at the construction universe today, are there areas that you think are most exciting? Some of these, kind of underpenetrated or underserved areas that you love to see more in?
I mean, yeah, I don't know if I can think of them off the top of my head. So some of them are like, I don't have a way to really articulate what I think is the right way to approach it, but I think the material supplier space continues to be a really interesting spot. I mean, you think about every part of it, pre-construction, and you think about like procurement and delivery. Some very big material percentage of the spend is gone to materials, right? That has to pass 16 hands to get the money down to the other party. So material suppliers also live in a technology universe that's completely separate from what we consider to be construction tech, right? When I was selling to material suppliers, they didn't even as late as 2020, 2021, when we sold to Procore, they didn't even know who Procore was. Like, I never heard of it. Right? That's how far away they are, but they're super critical to construction. So that's kind of a category that is interesting to me.
Isn't Brad Jacobs' new company in material supply?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah. And there's space there.
I'm glad that's what you said. I mean, selfishly, our one of the portfolio companies here at Euclid, we've got Build Vision, which is really just going after that problem head on. But to your point, Scott, I mean, these are trillion-dollar markets. It's a bit of a different call it buyer profile, customer profile, but because everyone knows the general contractor, or maybe because everyone's had that experience of dealing with the GC, that's where you see most of the kind of innovation.
I think it's simply that's just what the market has gotten to first. It's like sometimes I was reading this book about just different it was what's his name, Steve. It has nothing to do with construction tech. I can't remember his name. The book is called Extra Life. It's about the advancements of the lifespan, like how a lifespan is over time. And like there's some things in it that's obvious. It's like why didn't this particular advancement come out for so long that like, why did we have wheels on suitcases until like 1995, right? It's just sitting there. And I think there's something in the construction tech world that is a little bit that way, where because of Procore and their success, that's where we are. We're in this general contractor. We're general contractor girls living in a general contractor world. And that's just the way it is right now. But it's not the obvious answer. It's a weird answer.
Totally. I mean, I think Luke and I would be out of a job if there weren't this weird kind of psychological undercurrent where, at least in the venture world, like a market isn't a big, sexy market until there's already been a winner. And so, you look at businesses like some of our past guests. I mean, I think Olir at Slice is a great example, right? Or Owner is a great example too. People are like, hey, the market is generally restaurants. Well, it turns out if you hyper focus on pizza shops, of which there are tens of thousands, that's $1 billion+ market too, and I think you would see the same thing here, which is like sometimes people just haven't built the social proof and conviction around it yet.
Yeah. I think the other two, there's a few other categories that really interest me. One is commercial. I just pick on the status quo, right? Pick on GCs and pick on commercial construction, which has gotten a lot of attention, but there's so many different types of construction, including high volume stuff like field services stuff and restoration work and stuff that restoration's a particular interest of mine, because I like when I came out of Hurricane Katrina, that's a little bit of the background that I had is in the restoration world. And then I think that I do think there's a good, like, there is an interesting question of why can't we build a network, a true like platform for construction? And one of the reasons, in my view, is because the attempts that we've made to build a network in construction goes after the commercial general contractor. But the commercial general contractor is working with a variety of stakeholders who are not just they don't consider themselves as being commercial construction. Like Gray Bar Electric doesn't consider itself to be commercial construction. And, a lot of architecture firms or engineers. The geotechnical engineering company doesn't consider itself to be in commercial construction. And a subcontractor, an electrical subcontractor who's working on residential projects, restoration projects, sometimes commercial construction. You don't say, "What do you do?" And they say, "Hey, I'm in commercial construction." So it's just like all those lanes, the professionals, the engineers and the architects, the suppliers, the subcontractors and trade contractors who have a very different business models. All those things seem to be super interesting to me. And I think that you can pick almost, maybe not the professionals, but you can pick like the suppliers or the subcontractors, or you can pick these things and make an argument about building a really interesting platform for construction. I think a lot more credibly than you get to the actual platform. Not that you can't have success with general contractors and commercial construction. I just think that like the path to getting a true platform comes from some of those stakeholders who are a bit more diverse by nature.
Scott, have you been following any of the kind of like recent startups that have raised, pretty serious amounts of capital, like the Trunk Tools of the world? Yeah, would love to just get your take on like some of the newer entrants and if you're seeing, anybody kind of attack these a little bit differentiated than just like the classic build something for GCs.
I like, so first off, I'm not a big fan of raising a lot of capital in general. I like raising enough capital, and I like raising capital, which I've done. But when I see rounds that are really big, I do worry, because cycles come and go. And we've seen a lot of people struggle when they get big rounds and then things change, so I worry about that. I do think that I think like there's a one that was announced the other day, Permit Flow. I like that concept. I don't know that much about the company. I don't know that much about like the core fundamentals of them. But what I like about Permit Flow is that, and there's another company out there called Pulley that is working on this. which are permits touch everything, right? And general contractors have issues with permits. So does owners, so do the trades, like everybody, even the governments have issues with permits. So I think that permits are kind of an example of something that's a little bit like what I did with liens, where you have lien rights, which lien rights run through like a lightning bolt every project of every size, of every shape, right? And permits are the same way. They run through everything. And so I think that that's kind of an interesting, to the extent that they can harness that. I like that. I'm not connected with them in any way. The a company that like, some companies I like this company out in called Part 3, who I know a little bit. I don't work closely with them, but they're doing a work for the architects. And I don't know if that's the same kind of like it does, architects run through a lot of different things as well. But I like the idea of the professional layer. I think the professional layer where there's a whole bunch of, there's architects, there's engineers, there's attorneys, there's insurers, there's bonding companies. You have all these like professionals that kind of swaddle construction and again, flip around a lot between different types. So I like what they're doing. Watch a few examples.
We wanted to take 10 seconds to call out our partner and supporter on Verticals, Paraffin. You already know why embedded finance is important. You want to power all the ways your customers make money and grow their business. But you don't want to be a bank, you don't want to be a credit card company, you don't want to be a lender. Paraffin can help you with that. They help portfolio companies of ours, friends of ours, hundreds of other vertical founders increase retention, increase revenue, grow their TAM. So if you don't know Paraffin, please take a second to check them out. You can go to paraffin.com, that's one F, or the link is below this video. Thanks for listening, and back to the show. I think that's a really good point. I think too often people will download a list of the like Nike's codes from the Census Bureau or whatever and say, hey, these are the industries. But when you're deep in an industry, in a vertical, you have that expertise, you realize like that may not be the way that industry looks at it, and that may be hampering you from actually seeing the market opportunities that exist outside of the consensus. So I think that's an incredible point.
Really good way of saying it, Nick. It's like construction is, if you sit in if you go to permit flow, I don't know, but I guarantee if you look at the stuff that comes across the wire to them, it's going to be stuff in all kinds of things that you never would put your finger on. Like at Levelset, we had people working on the Dumbo ride at Disneyland, right? Or lenders who are lending to weird things, or collection agencies, it's just so much stuff and a lot of different diverse parties in a lot of different technology universes.
I also, founders just got beat down. Like I got beat down on my journey, and this was, I raised my seed in like 15 and then, A 17, B kind of 20. And for a long time, we got beaten down on market size. Like VCs just refused to touch things that didn't look and appear massive. And I think they've all realized that the market size like naturally expands and grows as you go multi-product, as you have payments, blah, blah, blah. And so I think we're seeing a little bit of a renaissance too, where there's all these like verticals within the vertical, right? Within construction, there's 1,000 things you can focus on, and people are being way too broad with the companies that they're building, and they're trying to do it for the VC and not for the customer.
I think, Luke, I think some people have realized that, and I do think there's that first tier of realization of, hey, great vertical platforms can expand vertically and add products, add payments, add services. But I still do think that, TAM remains the easiest reason for VCs to pass. But the reality is there's a lot of people who probably looked at Shopify too early and said, this is like, I don't know, commerce is early. Like, the journey of TAM expansion they've had is unbelievable. And like, I think the same is true of great vertical companies. They'll find their way. So Scott, I wanted to ask you about your M&A journey, and in the context of, a lot of founders out there who are considering this or thinking ahead on it. When did you, like when you started Procore was young, but how did you think about them at first? Did you have a spark in your head early that said, this could be an acquirer down the road, or did you see them as a competitor?
I did not. They're definitely not a competitor. And we saw them, over time, like we started to see the acquisition market, the M&A market of the market for acquirers shape up into being Autodesk, Procore, Oracle, maybe. But I didn't think about it too explicitly. I had a very early, to go into the competitive nature of it, I had a very early interaction with Procore. They were trying to build Procore Pay years ago. This may have been 2016 or something like this, right? And they fumbled it. They wound up not being able to build it for whatever reason. And they had come to us, and they had come to, like, some people from Procore had come to our office, and it felt like, and my understanding from later on talking to them is that they were building like a build by partner kind of matrix on Levelset. And ultimately they went to try to build it themselves. And we were talking to them about partnership there. And at that moment I saw that they were going to be a highly interested party, likely, in this category, because they had an explicit interest in construction payment. But the other thing I saw is that they were not going to be a competitor with us because they were looking at it backwards differently, right? They were looking at it from this, like, the Textura point of view. And Levelset was actually like the anti-Textura. It was like the opposite of Textura, right? We were both working on construction payment, but we were doing it opposite. So in talking to Procore in those early days, I knew that they were gonna try to get into this category, which could be interesting to us later on. But they were gonna do it in a way that was substantially different from where we were. And so I just kept running my race of what I saw, the vision that I had. And ultimately they didn't build Procore Pay. They tried one or two times, and then they came back after they went public. They came back, knocked on our door, and ultimately did acquire us to eventually launch Procore Pay. And that's kind of there's a little bit, there's some interesting elements there about, like, because we had to reach a certain stage in our path or our vision in order to be any kind of fit for them. And there's still a question of whether we are fit for them, well, for what they wanted to do ultimately, and what they ultimately launched with Procore Pay.
So I guess, when did those first conversations or relationships develop? And at what point in the Levelset life cycle did you feel like, okay, this is becoming interesting to them? I think they're gonna...
I had a very strange... I am the poster child for companies get bought, they don't get sold, right? I am the absolute poster child, because we talked to them like 2016. We're not talking acquisition. It was explicitly partnership. That completely fell apart very quickly, and nothing ever came of it. Like, I didn't hear a peep about their payment product for years. They went public. We were on our way. We were doing well. I was preparing for a Series D raise. And this is July of 2021. They contact me, and they want to talk about partnership or something vague like that. And I say, okay. And I have a conversation, and within the first, it was a 30-minute conversation, and it was very explicit. Like we want to talk to you about acquisition. And I'm like, all right, well, I wasn't for sale, but let's talk, I guess. We had a meeting. Tui was there. They brought everybody there, and it got like, they were in heat to acquire around this category. I understood they were talking to a few others in the category. There wasn't a lot, there's not many of us in the space. And then by August, we had a term sheet that would be negotiated, an LOI that was being negotiated that started off with a no, and then they were in heat. And then we were, under terms by in August or September, we were under terms, and we had a first close in October, which the HSR review, whatever, and then by November it was sold.
I'd love to drill in a little bit here because this is always I think most people who haven't been through the M&A song and dance, it's just this totally opaque world for folks and for founders. Like they reach out, they reached out in 2016, crickets. They come back to you in 21. This is COVID, so I'm assuming this is all happening over Zoom. And is that right, or did you guys get together in person?
No, the first one was over Zoom. The very quick call, but then we did an in-person meeting in Austin. And then we were doing in-person meetings in Santa Barbara.
Okay. And how did you feel the heat? Was it really like very explicit and clear, we want to buy you guys? Like, how did you sense that this is something that they really wanted? Because that's a beautiful sign for founders, and that's leverage. And typically a lot of these like corp dev guys do a good job of not showing you that.
They didn't do a good job of not showing me that.
Okay.
They knew what they wanted.
They were explicit. They were dressed to kill. And they, and I didn't want to sell. And I really didn't want to sell. I wasn't playing hard to get. I really didn't want to sell. It wasn't on my mind. I was looking to do other things. My mind started to change because the deal kept getting more. It just started getting difficult to not engage in conversation. I mean, even if you want to start triggering fiduciary duties around the conversation. So, and then I was getting more intrigued by because of how interested they were. I was getting more intrigued about what might be possible, right? And it did create leverage because of their interest. And that's part of when you go sell something I didn't fully realize. But because it was moving so fast, we also had to create a market very quickly, right? Most of the time you have a little bit more time. There's investment bankers involved and all this stuff. So we had to go quickly create a market and get someone else to look at the deal. And we did, and we got a LOI from another company. That was also competitive. It was actually a bit more than the LOI from Procore. And yeah, we were a pretty interesting case for how that came about. It was really like a asteroid.
So how did you, as a founder, get all the intention in the world of continuing to grow this business, but also you have, duty to your shareholders, your employees. Like, how did you think about that break point of, look, at some point this is going to make sense? Was it more mathematical or kind of a gut feeling?
There was a few elements to that, Nick. One is you start looking on paper about what it means to people. And it's hard to walk when you're seeing some of the checks that people are going to get, like people on the team would work on it with you for 7, 8, 9 years. And you're like, well, let's just keep going. Why? Because Scott's interested in doing it. That gets hard, or that's a weight. Then you have the economics of the deal, when we sold, the day we closed was 4 or 5 days before the top of the S&P 500 in 2021, right? Which led us to a bear market for a little bit of time. And I'm not Nostradamus. I wasn't predicting I didn't know that I would be that close to it, but I did feel, you saw a lot of companies raising at crazy valuations. You saw the M&A activity was off the charts right in that time period. And I knew that wasn't going to last forever. So that was a consideration. And then the third component, obviously, of the economics of the deal, how it's going to impact people. And the third component was TUI was extremely interested, and he had he was selling a vision for it to me that because of how much they were putting towards the deal and what they were spending and how many eggs they were putting in the basket, I was seeing visions with him and with them to think that, hey, this could be a real good opportunity for the vision of my company, right? Because that's what you're doing as a CEO. You're looking at your vision and your strategic elements, and you say, how do I capitalize this, right? And you can capitalize it with the money that your business makes. You can capitalize it with investment capital, but you can also capitalize it with that's all an acquisition is a capital round of a certain sort, right? Every equity round you have, you're selling shares, you're getting acquired just in small chunks. So I started to see, okay, I have all this vision. It seems to match really well with what this company thinks. This may be the best way to get it to go forward.
Yep, 100%.
Can you talk a little about just like you guys agree on? Walk us through kind of the LOI process, getting to a number that was agreed to. How that changed over time, during diligence and the transactional, like all this stuff is so high stress for folks. And it's like, I had crazy situations where prices got cut and then, deal fall apart, and then it comes back 6 months later. And, it's like a 12-month process nightmare. Like, what did it look like for you?
I'm surprised at myself in retrospect of how, low stress I found it to be. My biggest stress, and I think the reason why is my biggest stress, I think I would talk to with everyone is, should I do this or not? Right? I was I don't want to do it, or I don't think I should do it. I had that was my stress. So the terms and what they were doing didn't stress me out that much, because my decision, the thing that I was struggling with was just whether to get in the transaction. And, I mean, the negotiation was strange. It was like they sent us an offer, which was, I think at the time, maybe even less than half. I can't remember how much it was, but it was low. And it was like, no. And it was a pretty clear no. It wasn't even a negotiation posture and no. Right. And then it just went up pretty aggressively. And the terms were really clean the whole time. They were very clean with the terms. Like it was like the difference between negotiating with a private equity group and a venture capital group. I mean, it felt like we were just negotiating with a venture capital group. Is that a breakup there?
Yeah, just a little bit, but it's kind of the difference between, kind of different types. And like in this case, it sounded like they knew what they wanted. They had the capital and they were going to do it, if they could get you to say yes. So how, I guess maybe, and I know we're getting towards time, like if you were just talking to the founders out there who, maybe they're earlier on their journey, or maybe they're in the heat of a deal process, like what are the things you would tell yourself going into that deal? What's the advice you would give in terms of, preparing for or thinking about M&A?
I've been involved now on the board side with companies that get involved with M&A. I'm involved with a board that's acquiring, and I'm involved with the board that's being acquired. And in every comparing those situations, my situation, it's like they're all different flavors. So I think what was true for me that gave me a great result is that it goes back to the great companies are bought. They're not sold, right? It's like your job as CEO is to build the vision, execute the vision, and capitalize the vision. And if you're just excellent at doing that, you're going to have good outcomes. That's the only way to really great outcomes. There are lots of ways to have mediocre outcomes. There are lots of ways to have bad outcomes. And in those cases, things like negotiation and who your investment banker is and what your investment banker deck looks like, these things become more important, right? But if you're in the class of excellence and then you're going to have you're always going to have options, and you're always going to be able to have the kind of success that we had. So I would always say my first advice is like forget about all that M&A stuff and forget about, just focus on the excellence. Where you have to get really clever with M&A is when your plans aren't working well. That's when you need to get more clever with your M&A paths. And in those cases, you want to be, in those cases, you still got to work on timing and execution.
Yep. That makes sense. So I guess we're, I know we're about out of time, so maybe we'll just kind of get to last two quick fire questions here. So maybe I'll kick us off. If you were, kind of contemplating, let's say you were building Levelset in this environment today, would there be any way you would think about it differently, whether it's the deal or, taking Levelset further? There's a lot of late stage capital out there today, or, ultimately when the right deal's there, it.
I would be a little more, I may not have sold if I had all the faculties that I have now. I may have looked at I may have looked at other ways to solve my dilemmas about like how much money other people in the company were getting and these sorts of things. I may have looked at like capital options to solve that worry that I had, and trying to like carve a Goldilocks path to be able to keep going. Because when you sell, like that's the end of the rainbow, and that's the transaction. It's over. And so that's one thing. The core business itself, like there's a lot about it that I would just do again the same way. That's actually one of the reasons why I don't do it, is because like I don't want to do it.
You did it well the first time.
Right.
Awesome. Well, Luke, do you want to close this out with the final rapid fire?
Yeah. So I'd love to just hear craziest like story on the journey or whether it's a war story or popping the champagne. I mean, most people don't realize how painful these are, and how we were joking before we all hopped on the recording, how we're all secretly masochists. Is there any like story that pops up in your head about a painful experience?
I don't know. Well, if it was painful, I probably compartmentalized it somewhere. It's really hard to go find it. That's hard. There's so many things. I wish that my team was here, because they'd be able to probably, like, from an outsider looking in at me, come up with 10 things that would be interesting. But I don't feel like it was painful. Like, I just know that it was work, and that it relied on a lot, and it relies on a lot of things that are like out of your control a little bit of luck, a little bit of timing, the right people. Like, there's so many ingredients that have to come together to make that chemistry project work, which presents with you, to answer like with your question, Luke, it's like just presents you with thousands of little pits or peaks along the way. And that's one thing that makes it does, when I look back, I don't look at it and say, man, that was super painful, I can't do that, I wouldn't want to do that again. It's just that it's a lot. And I don't think that I have, my psychology is not that like I got it all to work out, and so I can get it all to work out again. And my psychology is like, wow, that was crazy how I got all that to work out. I don't know if I can get that to work out again. And so why go through 8 years of like laying railroad track to seems tricky. So I don't really have a direct answer for you. There's a lot of things. Nothing really stands out as being extremely painful. There's a lot of great moments along the way that I remember. But that's the answer.
It seems, Scott, you and team were both, but I'd personally always rather be lucky than good. So good reminder to us all. Awesome.
You're not gonna be like super lucky. You're not gonna be good and lucky. You can't
be. You got to be both those things.
You're not gonna be able to trip your way into too much success.
Ain't that the truth? Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. This is a ton of fun, and I think that brings us to time. But yeah, look forward to many more. All right, thank you, sir. Cool. Well, that's a wrap.
Thanks,
man.
It was fun. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you, Luke.
Yeah, you too, Scott. Pleasure, man.
So that's a perfect segue for our pulse. So let's dig into some of the most interesting financing developments we've been seeing with a little bit of a construction or built world twist today. So why don't we kick it off with trunk tools? Luke, you want to step in on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I really like this company and what it's doing. I thought it'd be a good highlight for this week's pulse. So they closed a healthy Series B, $40 million in July of this year. So not super recent, but I did want to just highlight, and if you go to the homepage, Nick, I did want to just highlight a little bit of what these guys are doing because I think it's fascinating. Similar to Open Evidence, who we've talked about in the past in the healthcare space, they started really with this kind of generative AI specifically for healthcare. Trunk Tools is doing something very similar, but in the construction industry. So, and obviously expanding product line. But what they've done is they've gone super deep on integration into all the different systems and tools that construction companies are leveraging. And they're basically trying to pull that all into like your classic ChatGPT-esque interface so that folks who are in the field, they're building, they can easily send a question. The system will crunch all of that data. It seems like a great LLM use case and be able to get you an answer. So if you're on the third floor of a, uncompleted kind of project, you can basically quickly ask a question. It could go parse through, architecture diagrams or whatever. I'm sure I'm doing that a lot of injustice, Nick, but nonetheless, I think it's a very cool company. What do you think?
I mean, look, I think it's a really interesting one. As you know, we've done a lot in, call it the built world at Euclid, and also kind of prior firms. So I was at Fifth Wall for a while, which some of you out there might know. Look, I've heard great things about Trunk Tools. I do think it was kind of in that first cohort of vertical AI companies that really set out to capture an industry by, just applying AI pretty generally. So, I've talked a little bit about, a framework I think about, which is, problem first versus solution first. And I think both can work. I think usually I'm more of a problem first sort of guy. But, look, when you have really big paradigm shifts like this, I think there's at least a perception that there is white space and that maybe it's a bit of a land grab moment. I think we've seen this, we talked about a few other companies that have been kind of, call it, taking this approach. We're talking about one in supply chain. I'm actually blanking on the name right now, but basically it's, hey, let's be the AI solution. Let's connect all of the, various point solutions you're using, the data stores, and let's kind of be the ChatGPT equivalent, but hyper-tuned. And I think it's personally a bit TBD whether or not that model will work. It may work on one angle, which is they will just get in there, scale fast, raise a bunch of money, and find, those hair on fire point solutions that'll really be their, anchors. But I think we're going to see, and I'm not throwing shade at Trunk Tools at all, but I think we're going to see some of these fail from the perspective of a lot of horizontal AI solutions are going after enterprises too. So if you're just a generalist, connect your documents and chat with them, I don't know that that's the long-term defensibility. That was a lot there, but super interesting one here.
Absolutely. What do we got next?
So why don't we bring up next AIM? So AIM stands for, AIM Intelligent Machines. That's interesting. Seems like kind of a new self-referential acronym there. But, they just raised $50 million. It's again, construction tech ecosystem play with a bit of a different spin. So what they're looking to do is retrofit heavy construction equipment. Heavy commercial machinery is actually a space I've been really interested in for a long time. It's old, it's legacy. We have a great business in our portfolio called Machinery Partner that's helping transform this space as well. I think what's cool about what they're doing is they're looking to bring autonomy to these machines that, some of them are built the same way they were 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago. Founding team, incredible AI chops. And so it's kind of a merger of AI, mobility, physical world, construction, and look, they're going out with a bang here. So 50 million, led by GC, Khosla, Human, and others.
Very interesting. Have you ever heard of a company called Comma?
Yeah.
So Comma did something interesting. It wasn't a vertical software business, but they basically enabled you to retrofit like self-driving technology into your existing vehicle. So if you had like a Toyota Camry or something that didn't have any self-driving, you could basically buy like a hardware part and get some self-driving capability. It seems like these guys are doing something similar with, construction machinery. And look, it makes a lot of sense to me. I'm sure it's a very, very difficult problem. And whenever you incorporate hardware, it's hard, as we all know, but, significant dollars, significant, big time investors behind them. So excited to see it. Maybe we'll see a crane operating itself in the neighborhood.
We'll see. I don't know. But I'd love to see it. Maybe not right next door. I do think this is ties into a very interesting theme of physical AI these days. I think massive opportunity, but anytime you do bring hardware into the mix, I think there are different scaling considerations, but AIM is certainly one to keep an eye on.
That brings up a quick question, Nick, that I think every founder should just ask themselves. And that's if AI gets to the point where it's as easy for like the end services business to build a like vertical SaaS solution that's completely tailored for them, and they can do that internally, where do you focus? We've talked a lot about moats and whatnot, but I do think like blue collar verticals are going to become only more valuable, especially like when you look at white collar stuff, like if AI enables folks who sit in front of screens every day at these services to build tooling on their own, like they're going to do it. So I think blue collars are like only going to become more and more prevalent, which is funny because when we were talking about robots of the future 10 years ago, everyone said that the blue collar folks were the ones who were going to get automated away first. And it's been the opposite.
Yep. Look, I totally agree with that. Like, I think ultimately if a solution is an AI solution or any other is really great, it's empowering you as the worker to do twice as much, 10 times as much as you ever could, more efficiently. And if that's the case and you're the business owner, don't you want to hire more of those people? Right. So like there's going to be disruption for sure. That's, creative destruction, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, look, I think as a society, we need to manage how that plays out. But, I think that the opportunity for, call it the blue collar world, the built world is incredible because if you think about it, there's a lot of these spaces that haven't even really adopted SaaS. With huge penetration. What AI, at least on the app layer side, is allowing some of these folks to do is skip a cycle. So, whether it's AIM or any of these others, super exciting moment. A few others we have too. So permit flow. This is one a few of you, I'm sure, have already come across because they've raised a couple rounds. But, not too long ago, they raised a $54 million round. It was led by Excel with Kleiner and Felicis and kind of another, laundry list of great backers. But, I have a sense we'll touch on this with Scott later today too, just because I know with his focus on liens, there's some similarities here. They really, at Permit Flow, focus on kind of this, the permit as almost the source of truth, like everything around that permitting process. And if you think about it, at least in the United States and most other, developed nations, you want to build something, well, you need a permit for that, right? Anyone who's renovated any part of their house has experienced that. And obviously the problem just grows exponentially the bigger you get and the bigger the project or development is. So, they're kind of building out their ecosystem around this concept of the permit. I think that's almost just as interesting as saying, hey, we're going to pick the general contractor and go after their workflow. The cool thing about the permit is it connects to a lot of different stakeholders. What do you think about this one, Luke?
Yeah, this is interesting. So I I haven't shared this on the pod yet, but I'm building a house right now. And I bought a house in February of 25, and we just are starting construction now.
Oh my God.
Like whatever, significantly later. And the reason for the delay has been the freaking permitting, right? And it's been so painful, but it touches architecture and their drawings. It touches the geological guys. It touches landscaping. It touches all the general contractor stuff. So look, I think it's a great problem. Like if you don't expand, it feels more like a transactional problem. It's not going to be like a long-term recurring thing. But if you can kind of move into and start to spot opportunities where there's problems to solve, that seems like a beautiful kind of wedge into all sorts of like tangled, sub-verticals of construction that I think people don't think about. They just think Procore won the space or whatever. And we'll hear from Scott, I'm sure, but there's like hundreds of sub-verticals in construction.
Yep. God, there's almost this concept, and we'll have to think of a better name for it, but like a mega workflow, or like a Uber workflow, power workflows, like a workflow that like is big. It touches a lot of stakeholders. Like, you can see here, right? Everyone from contractor to developer to architect. It's not going away. It's hairy. And if you almost can think about building your product around that versus, I think what a lot of people naturally do, which is like, okay, let's think about the first user, the first industry. I mean, as you can see here on the bottom, like it even has pretty big overlap with public sector, right? I mean, administering these permits are not only a complex thing for municipalities, but it's a big source of their revenue too. So think about that surface area for expansion. Pretty cool.
Yeah, and they're going to have to fight a lot of competition and battles on a lot of different fronts too, because you have like government tech that's doing some permitting from that side. You have other angles, so it'll be interesting to see like where they fight their battles on what fronts.
Totally. Well, I think we got one or two more here. Luke, I know I saw this one when you released it. Tell us about BuildStock.
Yeah, so BuildStock is another really interesting company. I just highlighted it on the newsletter. I did a little bit of a deep dive into the business. It's going after construction procurement, which everybody knows is a total pain in the butt. But specifically, they're doing like the AI agent workforce kind of angle. And so what they've done is they found a lot of kind of interesting products that they feel like agents can automate a lot of, or a significant portion of. And so, it's super early, like very, very early kind of pre-seed round, but one of the kind of newer like AI agent workforce specifically for, particular segments of construction. So thought it was a highlight.
Yeah, that's a cool one. Also, I think just a great example with Catherine, the founder there, true domain expert. She was an architect, right? Like lived with the problem. And I mean, I think in some of these markets where like, that's the one thing about construction is like, there's a lot of stakeholders. It's very hairy and they have a particular way of thinking. Understanding that helps. So that's cool one to watch.
And sorry, real quick here too. The other thing I really liked about what she was doing is she said, we're just going to go after high-rise construction in the Northeast. I think it was even like in New Jersey or something. I can't remember the exact location, but there's something for folks to think about, especially in hairy industries like construction, is like you can go hyper deep on one geo and really nail it. I just think it's a valuable approach that gets lost with a lot of founders.
100%. Let's hit this final one, and then I know we've got a Scott rolling in very shortly to tell us a bit about his M&A journey. But Unlimited Industries, I did see this one too. What caught your eye about Unlimited?
Yeah, so this one is, we've talked a lot about like AI rollups, right? And I just thought this was interesting. They just did a $12 million of seed, really cool website, but big name investors again behind this one. But this is basically like a de novo construction company. It's like the first AI native construction company, which it looks like what they're doing is they've built kind of their own platform and operating system for construction companies. for themselves as a construction company. And now they're actually going out and executing build projects. So it'll be interesting to see, like, that's obviously a very complicated business. And when you add the technology layer in and you manage that thing with your own OS, it's going to be like very difficult. But if they can pull it off, it can be a massive company. There's a zillion, massive construction companies. And my favorite part about this is they said 1 in 200 construction projects get done on time. So that's a good problem to go after, because I'm living it right now.
Yeah. I know we've talked about this kind of concept of, be the company or sell the tech into the company a lot on the pod. So maybe we don't need to beat a dead horse, because maybe everyone knows my view. But man, I don't know. Like, you going up against Burns and McDonnell, and yeah, they're not a tech company, but these guys are smart. And they've been doing this for 100 years. And like the distribution, the relationships they have, like, there's some areas where I think, hey, this can work really well. And maybe Unlimited will. Like, I don't want to throw shade at them at all. But if Burns and McDonnell is what you want to be, hard for me to imagine you're going to get that, like 5 to 10 year, IPO journey. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just a curmudgeon over here.
No, I mean, construction, it's got to be probably like one of the hardest places to pull this strategy off.
Yeah.
Complex.
Totally. But what you can see here is, though, like a new operating system for construction, I think there's often a optionality here of like, look, if you nail this OS, that has a ton of just standalone tech value. All right, everyone. Well, that is our show today. Super fun jaunt through Levelset's journey, exiting for $500 million to Procore. I think a ton we learned a ton. I think a ton for founders to learn as well. As always, we want to thank you guys for joining us, for listening, for supporting the pod.
Cool. I love it. Well, great episode, Nick. We'll see you all next week.
Sounds good.